يا رايحين على مصر مين يبعت سلامي في كلمتين يا هلا الله، مشتاق لناسها الطيبين ودي ياما فيها مخلصين يا ما شاء الله. وفي أزهر العلماء تقدر تقول ما تشاء، ده أنا والله بدعي لهم رب السما وقولوا امين ان شاء الله ان شاء الله. الله الله يا ربي الله الله، ومن قلبي كده من الها صلى الفجر ولف في مصر وحواليها. الله الله على الازهر الله الله، الله اكبر من الدنيا كمان واكتر، لو قلت اوصفها انا مش حنصفها وكفيها.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, to Him we belong and to Him we shall return. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal in His infinite wisdom and in His infinite mercy to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive our sins. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to purify our intentions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our parents' sins and have mercy upon them as they had mercy upon us. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to raise us high in the afterlife, to allow us to be with our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us beneficial knowledge, and we seek refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal from knowledge that does not benefit. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the hardships from upon our brothers and sisters across the world. Last time we started in Babul Amr, commands, and we mentioned the definition for Al-Amr, and we spoke about the sigha, the usages, the utterances of what form does the Amr come in, and a few other things. And today inshallah we will continue with the mabhath of Al-Amr, the subject matter or the area of focus and study known as Amr or commands. And we stopped where the Musannif rahimahullah wa nafa'ana Allahu bi'ulumihi wa ulumukum fid darain ameen said وَلَا يَقْتَضِي التَّكْرَارَ عَلَى الصَّحِيحِ. He says that Al-Amr, a command, does not imply repetition according to the correct position. Now, I wanted to mention in this regard that it is important to understand we are speaking about the issue of commands, which is a mabhath, which is a subject or area of study within the area of study of speech or alfaz. Okay? And so when we understand Amr, when we understand commands to be within the subject matter of alfaz, speech or words, we know that there is going to be a lot involved in understanding any linguistic consideration for that matter. So when we're speaking about Amr, we're speaking about commands, we're speaking about language. So this is how we are going to understand the Quran, this is how we are going to understand the Sunnah, the language of the Quran, the language of the Sunnah, and even the usage, language usage between us as individuals. And so what we will realize is that the ulama differ in terms of language usage from section to section, topic to topic, subject matter to subject matter. They will differ on what exactly this means or that means. They will differ on the source and how to understand. They will differ on the logic that should be applied to understand why is it that I should understand, for example, the command to mean this or that. And so as we will proceed, we will realize that Imam al-Juwayni, he sticks to a specific position or a specific opinion that's his, that he believes to be the correct one. Most of the time he follows the Jumhur opinion, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he follows an opinion that's slightly contradictory to his own school, or sometimes he doesn't, or most of the times he doesn't. So what I want to just illustrate is that what I'll try to do is reference when Imam al-Juwayni is disagreeing or he's actually taking an opinion, and I won't go into too many details of the details of the schools of thought in any given matter, because it will be too long and extended, and if we do that we won't be able to get through this introductory text in a quick fashion. So back to where Imam al-Juwayni says, وَلَا يَقْتَضِي التَّكْرَارَ عَلَى الصَّحِيحِ. It does not imply repetition according to the correct position. So obviously here he believes that the correct position is that when a person or when a command is given, for example, kul, eat, right? Ishrab, drink, then that command can and will be fulfilled by one instance. So as long as a person picks up a cup, for example, and drinks, and that's all, then he has fulfilled his duty in terms of that given specific command. Now, he says that it does not imply repetition according to the correct position. So there is another position that says that when a command is given, it means that you have to do it several times or many times or a limited amount of times. It's not specified by being given once or done once or completed once. Because Imam al-Mahalli explains, he gives the logic behind why this is the case. So we understand that there's a difference between the majority opinion is that when you give a command, it is completed or is fulfilled when it is done once. That is the majority opinion, or the more popular opinion. The minority opinion is that when a command is given, then that command means that you do it for a certain period of time, unlimited amount of time, whatever the case may be. Because what Imam al-Mahalli says, and the reason why he argues or he offers the logic for why Imam al-Juwayni said what he said. He says, لأن ما قصد به من تحصيل المأمور به يتحقق بالمرة الواحدة. That when a command is given, when that command is fulfilled once, then the individual has completed the desired order. There's no inherent insinuation that this person should repeat this action several times. And then Imam al-Juwayni says, إلا إذا دل الدليل على قصد التكرار, except if there is proof or there is an indication that says that you should do it repetitively. Okay? So that al-asl is that a command does not infer or mean or indicate repetition unless there is some sort of proof that says that you should repeat. So a good example for this is أقيموا الصلاة. The command أقيموا الصلاة in the Quran doesn't give us any type of inference or insinuation that we should do this more than once. The command is clear, أقيموا الصلاة. So if you do qiyam, if you establish prayer once, then it should suffice. So how do we know that prayer should be done more than one time? We know it from other adillah, other proofs. And what is the proof for that? We have the hadith of Mi'raj, when the Prophet ﷺ went up with Sayyidina Jibreel, and then he passed and went to Sidrat al-Muntaha, and he spoke to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to do 50 prayers, and then he went back and forth, and we know the long hadith. And it's that hadith that we learn that the salah will be done 5 times a day, every day, etc., etc. So we have a command, aqimu salah, and then we have an independent dalil that teaches us that yes, this given command should be repeated day in and day out 5 times a day. Okay? Same thing, for example, for Sawm Ramadan. We know from the adillah that fasting should not be done once, it should be done in the month of Ramadan. So every time you have the month of Ramadan, you are obligated to fast. Okay, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to fast just to simply fast, that means once. But we have the adillah through the Quran and Sunnah and so on that teach us that every Ramadan we have to fast the month of Ramadan. And then Imam Al-Juwayni says, وَلَا يَقْتَضِي الْفَوْرَ وَلَا يَقْتَضِي الْفَوْرَ. He says, nor does it necessitate immediacy. Meaning that when a command is given, there is no clear indication that that command must be fulfilled immediately. Okay, there is no clear indication that that is the case. So if someone asks me to do something and I do it in an hour, 2 hours, or 10 hours, what I'm required to do is simply fulfill the obligation. There is no attachment to time. There's no recognition of time or consideration of time. Now, I'm saying this, and I'm almost, it's as if I'm arguing for the opinion of Imam Al-Juwayni. And Imam Al-Juwayni's opinion is a popular or the majority opinion. But it's important to understand that there are differences of opinion on this matter. So there are ulama who say that no, al-amru yaqtadi al-fawr, meaning that when you hear a command, that means that you should fulfill it immediately. You shouldn't wait. Okay? And so it's here when you go into the books of fiqh and you see how the ulama differed on various issues. For example, hajj. You have some madhahib that say that hajj is wajib, it's an obligation, but it can be done any time in the lifetime. Right? There's no specific obligation to do it immediately. Right? There are other madhahib that say no, as soon as you have the financial capabilities, or you have the capabilities in general to fulfill your obligation of hajj, then you have to do it immediately, ala al-fawr. As soon as the opportunity is there and you can do it financially and physically and so on, then you have to do it. So we see that those types of differences in the furu' fiqhiyya, in the branches of fiqh, their root is here, in the books of usul, in the understanding of alfaz, in the understanding of words and phrases. How do I understand commands? Right? And you see the differences. And so when you move on to the more advanced text, you'll find extreme nuance. And you'll find argumentation. Why is it that the command means this, and why does it necessitate immediacy, or why does it not necessitate immediacy, and vice versa, etc., etc. And you'll see that the arguments become very nuanced, very specific. The ulama will depend on logical considerations. They will depend upon linguistic considerations. They will depend upon the usage of the Arabs and how they used commands, etc. And even, based on the Quran and Sunnah and how commands were used or how prohibitions were used, etc., etc., etc. So I'm just offering this so that people can be introduced to this concept. And so when you move on to the larger text and you see, oh wait, hold on, there are different opinions. Actually, someone else says that a command necessitates immediacy, whereas Imam Al-Juwayni in Al-waraqat said it doesn't necessitate. I'm confused. No, this way you understand that there is a difference of opinion, and you will learn the more nuanced difference of opinion in the future when you enter into more involved texts. So, and like I mentioned, Imam al-Mahalli offers the logic for Imam al-Juwayni's argument, and he says that because لأن الغرض منه إيجاد الفعل, the gharad, the duty of the command is to fulfill it when it is asked. It is not attached to any time, right? There's no consideration of time. Right, so when a command is given, it is fulfilled by doing it as it was asked to be done. So for example, if I say, ishrab, drink, for example, drink water, as long as you fulfill the obligation of drinking water, then you fulfill the command. There's no insinuation or an inference of being attached to a certain time. Okay? Then Imam Al-Juwayni says, وَالْأَمْرُ بِإِيجَادِ الْفِعْلِ أَمْرٌ بِهِ وَبِمَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْفِعْلُ إِلَّا بِهِ. He says a command to perform an action is a command to perform the action as well as everything that the action cannot be completed without. So one more time. Al-amru bi-ijad al-fi'l amrun bihi. Al-amru bi-ijad al-fi'l amrun bihi. A command to perform an action is a command to perform the action. وَبِمَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْفِعْلُ إِلَّا بِهِ. As well as everything that the action cannot be completed without. For example, Imam al-Juwayni says, كَالْأَمْرِ بِالصَّلَوَاتِ أَمْرٌ بِالطَّهَارَةِ الْمُؤَدِّيَةِ إِلَيْهَا. He says that a command to pray is not only a command to pray, meaning that you are obligated to pray, but you are obligated to do everything that allows you to pray. Okay, what does that mean? So he gives an example, and he says that when you are commanded to pray, there are certain conditions to be able to pray. For example, tahara, purity, right? Ritual purity, tahara. So to be able to actually fulfill your responsibility of the obligation of prayer, you are obligated to what? To make wudu, to engage in ritual purity. So there's no way for you to actually go and fulfill your obligation of prayer without what? Making wudu. So al-amru, as he says, al-amru bi-ijad al-fi'li amrun bihi wa bima la yatimmu al-fi'lu illa bihi. There is no way that you can fulfill your obligation of prayer without fulfilling the wudu or without making wudu. Right? And so, for example, the ulama give in terms of mas'h al-ras, they'll say that you have to make ghasl al-wajh, you have to wash your entire face. Right? So some of the ulama, when they come to say, okay, how about this top line, this absolute top line in the face, how do you actually wash that? They say that you have to go a little bit further. Now, that going a little bit further, is it an obligation? No, it's not. It's an obligation because of the obligation to wash the face, right? So unless you go that line, a little bit higher, there is no way that you can actually fulfill the obligation of washing your entire face. Although that specific command is not there. There's no command that says wash the line on top of the top of your face, right? So that becomes an obligation from the perspective that there is no way to fulfill the given obligation without doing it. Because wudu, going back to the example of Imam al-Juwayni, wudu is shartu sihha. If you don't make wudu, your salah is invalid, your prayer is invalid. Okay? Brothers, you can please come in. Join here, inshallah. So he said, كالأمر بالصلوات أمر بالطهارة المؤدية إليها. Then he says, وإذا فعل أي المأمور به. Then he says, if the obligation or the command is fulfilled, يخرج المأمور عن العهدة. What does that mean? If you fulfill your obligation, if you fulfill the command, then bari'at dhimmatuk. Your dhimma, your conscience is free. You have no more concerns. You have fulfilled your obligations. You have now fulfilled your pact, your uhda. Right? That's it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded you to do something. You did it. Now you have fulfilled your obligation. Alright? So then Imam al-Juwayni says, وَيَدْخُلُ فِي خِطَابِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Okay? Believers are included in those who Allah Most High addresses. Now, he's mentioning this because shortly he will mention that the kuffar as well are involved in or included in the khitab of Allah Azza wa Jal, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everyone is included in the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, وَالسَّاهِ وَالصَّبِيُّ وَالْمَجْنُونُ غَيْرُ دَاخِلِينَ فِي الْخِطَابِ. Then he says that the one who forgets, the sahi, the one who temporarily forgets, children, the insane, none of them are included in the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the speech of Allah is not concerned with a person who has no legal responsibility or capability to fulfill the given commands. If you can't do it, then what's the point? غير مكلف. You're not legally responsible. There's a hadith for this, these three categories. Does anyone know it? رفع القلم. Excuse me? Yes. Yes. Precisely. Okay, so الساهي حتى يفيق والنائم حتى يفيق والمجنون حتى يعقل, right? The majnoon, the crazy person, until he becomes sane once again. The child until they reach puberty. So none of these categories of individuals is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concerned with. Right? They are concerned with them indirectly. They have huquq from other avenues and so on, but they themselves are not legally responsible to fulfill the commands of Allah Azza wa Jal, because they have no recourse to do so. They have no capabilities of doing so. And then, this would be from the perspective of these individuals. It will be a form of dhulm. If I'm insane and I have no capability of doing, then how am I supposed to fulfill that responsibility? I can't. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رُفِعَ الْقَلَمْ عَنْهُمْ. They are not responsible or legally responsible. Then he says, وَالْكُفَّارُ مُخَاطَبُونَ بِفُرُوعِ الشَّرَائِعِ. Then he says, disbelievers are addressed by the details of the sacred law, وَبِمَا لَا تَصِحُّ إِلَّا بِهِ وَهُوَ الْإِسْلَامِ, and by what they are not valid without, i.e. Islam. So this is another point, and as I've been mentioning, all of these specific masail, all of these areas of interest that we're considering, there is difference of opinion on them in terms of the approach of the linguistic approach, the logical approach that you're considering. There are various considerations that will be had, and you'll read them, like I said, you'll read them in the more advanced texts. In this regard, we know that the opinion of the jumhur is that the kuffar, the disbelievers, are actually addressed, and they are addressed with the furu'a, with the specifics or with the details of sacred law. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says aqimu salah, that the kuffar, the disbelievers, are actually involved in that realm. So people think that's a little bit odd, they're disbelievers. Well, this is the jumhur opinion. Now they discuss this extensively, and they say, how does this actually play out in the world? I mean, there are some masail, you can see because there are other ulama say, obviously, but it's more minority opinion that says that they are غير مخاطبون. They are not addressed with the details of the sacred law. They're only addressed with the kulliyat, or the generalities of, for example, becoming a Muslim, all right, or with Islam or with Iman, etc. But in this regard, no, the jumhur opinion is that they are responsible for the details of the sacred law. What Imam al-Mahalli says here a little later, he says that all this means, practically speaking, is that in the afterlife there will be ziyadat adhab. Their punishment will be increased. And there's dalil for this. This didn't come from someone's musings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, "Ma salakakum fi saqar." What placed you in saqar, in Jahannam? قالوا لم نكن من المصلين. They said, we did not pray. Right? So obviously, why would a kafir in Jahannam say, I did not pray? So he's clearly referencing what? A detailed matter within sacred law. He didn't say, I did not believe. He said, I did not pray. Right? Another verse is, وَيْلٌ لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ. Wail, there are various interpretations for what wail is, wail, woe and others, but one of the interpretations is that it's a valley in Jahannam. Wailun lil mushrikeen, the polytheists. الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ. these mushrikeen, what was the sifa that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them? What was the characteristic that Allah mentioned them in? He says, الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْتُونَ زَكَاةً. They did not pay zakah. Zakah is what? Zakah is min al-furu'. It is from the details of sacred law. It is not from the general matters of sacred law. So like I mentioned, the fa'ida that, or this manifests itself, the ulama say, in the afterlife, that the kafir will be held accountable and will have increased adab, will have increased punishment in the afterlife because he or she did not fulfill these details in this life. Now, there's one point to consider is, can a non-Muslim stand up and pray? No, because al-Islam is what? Al-Islam min shurut al-sihha. To actually pray, one of the conditions is what? Islam. Right? So obviously a non-Muslim, if they want to get out of this problem, they have to become Muslim, and then they pray, and then their prayers are fulfilled. Okay? I'm giving you a very basic version of this subject matter. These are all very common issues that are addressed in the books of usul, and they're addressed much more extensively than this. Right? But just because I mentioned this is a beginner text, so we're not going to get into too many of those details. Then he continues, he says, وَالْأَمْرُ بِالشَّيْء. He says, Al-amru bil-shay', a command to do something, nahyun an diddihi. A command to do something is a prohibition against its opposite. Right? So if I command you, for example, to stand up, what's the opposite of standing up? Sit down. So I'm actually prohibiting you from sitting down. I'm telling you stand up, meaning don't sit down. Right? So he says that wal-amru bil-shay', when I command you to do something, I am instantaneously or simultaneously prohibiting you from doing the opposite. Alright? وَالنَّهْيُ عَنِ الشَّيْءِ أَمْرٌ بِضِدِّهِ. And a prohibition to do something, or prohibition from doing something, is actually a command to do the opposite. Alright? This manifests itself greatly in the furu' of fiqh. And you'll see this, in the books of fiqh, and when they say, okay, you're commanded to do this, that means that you cannot do this because this will actually lead to that, and so on and so forth. But it's just important to understand that when we're talking about the mabhath of alfaz, because this is where we're talking about speech, and the way in which you understand the Quran and Sunnah is through speech. And one of the forms of speech is what? Amr, commands. And so what's important is that when you go and you're not going to read the Quran, read the Sunnah as a faqih, you have to understand that commands insinuate or infer very specific things. And so you have to have all of these considerations present as you're reading a command. Alright? And we'll see, inshallah, as we progress within this area of study of commands, how it manifests itself, but at a very basic level. Then he says, وَالنَّهْيُ prohibition, or to prohibit, استدعاء الترك بالقول ممن هو دونه على سبيل الوجوب. What this means is, to prohibit means to verbally call someone who is below one to leave an action by way of obligation. So a prohibition, just like an amr, comes from what? From someone who's high to someone who is lower. Now there's also a difference of opinion on this issue, right? Many ulama say that there is no consideration of high and low and so on. That you can actually have an amr from someone who is your same level or someone who's beneath you and so on. But the general opinion that's considered when you're talking about prohibitions and obligations and commands usually goes from someone who's above to someone who's lower. And the simple logic that's offered for that is, I have to be able to actually instill it upon you. I need to have some sort of power over you to make you fulfill that obligation. If I have no power, if I'm not above you, quote unquote, then how am I going to force you to do it? Right? You can tell me, no, I don't want to do it. If I'm your equal, or if I'm below you, So that's the simple logic that's offered, but it's refuted in other ways and with other proofs and other adillah. For example, they'll tell you that, well, in the Quran, Fir'aun's Hashia ordered him. They ordered him, they told him A, B, C, and D, and he listened. And that was an order. So how does that work out? And then they have a discussion and so on. But that's just generally, some of how this mas'ala, this specific question is considered. Then he says وَيَدُلُّ النَّهْيُ عَلَى فَسَادِ الْمَنْهِيِ عَنْهُ. Then he says that this prohibition, any given prohibition, indicates the invalidity of what is prohibited. Alright? So when something is prohibited, it shows that يدل على فساد المنهي عنه, that specific thing is fasid, it's invalid. So for example, everything works better in examples. A woman who menstruates, right? She is prohibited from praying. She cannot pray. Now if she prays, what happens? How do you describe her prayer? You say it's fasid, it's batil, there's no meaning to it. It's absolutely invalid. Right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you or prohibits you from doing something, if you do that thing, then it's fasid, it's invalid. So that thing itself, that action, if you fulfill the action, if you fulfill that prohibition, then it's fasid, it's invalid. Right? This also works itself out in many of the furu' of fiqh. You'll talk about, for example, praying in a land that is stolen, or making wudu with water that is stolen. Okay, well that wudu and that water is manhi anhu because it's stolen. Well, does it affect the actual wudu or not? I'm actually asked to simply find pure water to make wudu. So what do I care if the wudu is stolen or not? And the story goes on. Right? So I'm going to give you a taste of what this stuff looks like. When we move on to the bigger text, we'll see how these specific issues play themselves out. He offers some amthili here. I just want to see, because I'm not going through all of the sharh of Mahalli, I'm just picking and choosing things that will be beneficial for us. Okay, well, so inshallah we'll stop there. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
الله الله يا ربي، الله الله ومن قلبي علي توضى كده مني الها، صلى الفجر ولف في مصر وحواليها. الله الله على الأزهر، الله 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 أكبر، أم الدنيا كمان واكتر، لو قلت اوصفها أنا مش حنصفها وأكفيها. الله الله